right, I am happy to be joined with the Chief Strategy Officer with Wake Network, Chris Murray joins us. Chris, how are things?
Good. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's obviously great to have you on. Some big news with the company this week. What's been the feedback so far on some of the announcements that you made? But for anybody that's watching right now and they're starting to learn, your company announced, the Wake Network, the first import of psilocybin from Jamaica into the United States. So straight up, why is this significant from a broader industry-wide perspective important? And what should potential investors, once you do go public, be interested in this announcement?
Yeah, so I mean, great question. Right on the point of what we're talking about this week in terms of import. And I think kind of to speak to the significance for the market and for not just investors, but also patients, really, the people that are actually ultimately going to be receiving these therapeutics once they're proven out, is that from the Wake perspective, our hypothesis of psychedelic substances was that people wanted to access naturally occurring substances. Okay. Now there's plenty of manufactured tryptamines and psychedelic substances, but that all the evidence that we have, even looking at John Hopkins' Ultimate Unlimited Sciences kind of citizen science study, those are people who are microdosing or who are dosing with naturally occurring psilocybin. So the anecdotal evidence out there is naturally occurring, non-synthetic. And we realized and we knew that there's a risk attached to looking to a market that has a legal jurisdiction to be the source of this product. And we knew that it was a risk we were going to take, because we knew if we could proceed past that barrier, then it was going to set us up in really advantageously as a producer of naturally occurring psilocybin. So at this point, that was a risk that we knew was possible. And this announcement, reason it's significant, is it's no longer a risk for us. We've de-risked the supply chain, and it's created an opportunity to introduce a totally different form factor of psilocybin in the United States that's really not going to be tied up in a lot of the patent disruptions that are occurring around synthetic psilocybin.
Right. So fast forward, looking forward momentum, being the first to do this. What does this mean, I guess, for the overall company, the advantages that it'll bring in due time, especially when a lot of people start asking, continue to ask within this industry, how do these companies generate revenue?
So like the biggest advantage of not just producing psilocybin ourselves and producing these mushrooms and extracting from them, but also establishing the supply chain, is now we can start to introduce these products into an environment where the FDA can be approached for drug master file development, and we can actually produce a formulated substance based on these naturally occurring, psilocybin APIs, and actually introduce that into the FDA process for approvals. It's significant because there's limitations in production within the United States. There's also limitations in terms of regulatory opportunities within Jamaica. So by creating this connection, it really develops a strong supply chain for producing a registered pharmaceutical API specifically that we're in the process of developing.
Why do you think your company was the first to do this? Because I assume that other companies are looking to explore the same opportunity, but why do you think you were first?
I think it's twofold. I think the perspective that we've taken to approaching psychedelics has very much been about thinking about what the patient's experience is, what the actual individuals that are going to use these products downstream is going to be, understanding what that market could potentially be for a business, and really making sure we're kind of projecting out what's the value structure that we could have downstream for a product like this. And that really speaks to why we've chosen to focus on microdosing substances more so than macrodose substances. Now we have some interesting kind of research ideas that we'd like to explore downstream, but our focus right now, as evidenced by the most recent announcement we made about our approval in Jamaica, has been on microdose substance, which is the predominant form of consumption of psilocybin presently. So we're meeting the market, right? We're seeing where people are, and we're finding that market, and then we're using the skills and the experience that we have to move that through the right regulatory channels towards approval.
Data's everything, right?
Exactly.
You brought up Jamaica, and as I do more research, your business in Jamaica is a very different way from other companies in that you're actually engaging with existing farmers and mycologists. So tell me about Wake Jamaica and why, that relationship works so well.
Yep. So Wake Jamaica is really a product of the labor of two individuals initially, and then kind of we've spent the last couple of years working with them to develop this into Wake Jamaica fundamentally. But Ronald and Terry Smith are two mushroom farmers in Jamaica. They've had an operation there that they've worked through producing gourmet mushrooms and other fungus products for a number of years. And our founder, Nick Murray, and Terry are very close friends. It's brother and sister type relationship, big sister, little brother type thing. And the idea of finding a new way to kind of introduce psychedelics moving forward, understanding Jamaica's kind of regulatory blind spot, so to speak, in that it's not illegal, but there's no law prohibiting it. So it's an interesting kind of milieu. It created an opportunity to essentially expand Wake Jamaica's operations and really introduce new substances into that. So that was kind of the foundation, but what really drew us to working and expanding and building things out is that for us, this is also about making it a sustainable business that can grow, that we can have as many people that want to be involved, finding ways to.
So what do you mean by that, sustainable business?
So that speaks both to not only the way that we produce in terms of the actual substrate we use for growing our full-blown mushrooms. It's not grown in grain, it's grown on a mix of lemongrass and bamboo, but it also speaks to the people that grow our mushrooms with us. So we're part of a decentralized cooperative across Jamaica. It's ultimately a number of satellite farms exist in different areas within the country, fairly close to our main headquarters in Manchester. But the growers in those areas are marginalized women and youth that essentially are using mushroom farming as a sustenance program for themselves. And the way we work with them is they can simply keep mushrooms for food if they want to, or we buy them in an offtake agreement. And it's entirely structured to be fully sustainable to support these individuals to keep growing. But also, when I speak to the lemongrass and bamboo, what's interesting about the substrate is that substrate itself grows in the hills of where we grow our mushrooms.
Right.
So by choosing that as a substrate, it actually regrows faster than the mushrooms. It takes the mushrooms to actually chew it up. Now we've tested our substrate. We know it has, the metal concentration is nowhere near, products that we have seen in market. And so we're really, really focused on making sure that sustainable lossless cycle is kind of continued. So we pull if I was to illustrate it for you, we essentially pull bamboo and lemongrass out of the woods. That's processed, pasteurized, introduced into our sterile environment for mushroom inoculation. The mushrooms are grown. They have several rounds of flushes. So you pull those off the grow bags. That grow bag then goes to the goats that essentially mow the lawn on our property. Those goats then defecate and produce fertilizer for the bamboo and lemongrass, and the cycle repeats itself. There's no water draw whatsoever because we
got to get down there and film this stuff, Chris.
We're working on it. COVID's made that a little bit complicated, but it's very much kind of ingrained in the production process as much as it is the business.
What's this all translate into then?
So in terms of the actual mushroom production down there, so understanding the importance for investors of sustainability in terms of your approach, there's a number of different ways you can grow mushrooms. You can grow mushrooms in the wild. You can by foraging them. You can grow mushrooms in an environment like ours where we're choosing to use substrate that is actually naturally occurring around us. You can grow it on oats. You can grow it on grains. And those are all sorts of different approaches to it. From our lens, wild harvested mushrooms are naturally occurring. As long as you're foraging them sustainably, there is no drain in terms of where the water cost is or any kind of waste production. Then you go to our process, which is fueled by naturally occurring rain cycles. When you start to think about the water cost of things grown in grains and things grown in oats, it gets into the hundreds and thousands of gallons to produce mushrooms, which ultimately is not sustainable. It's similar to the amount of water that's used to grow things like almonds in desert states in the United States. It's not a sustainable way to produce an agricultural product.
Well said. I have to ask too, as much as like this week's announcement in the US obviously garners a lot of attention, last week's announcement too, where you became the world's first phase 2 psilocybin microdosing trial was announced and received ethics approval from the Jamaican Ministry of Health and will serve to provide data into its effect on anxiety and depression. Have to ask, with most research focused on studying psilocybin and mind-altering doses for major depression, is attention, you think, lacking on the subclinical side of mental illness?
I think absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think it's because it's like really understanding what is clinical and what's subclinical. I mean, that's a vague barrier in and of itself, right? In terms of what
And before I go
psychedelic.
any further, maybe explain, as people are still learning, the difference between clinical and subclinical.
So it really, again, there's some subjectivity in that if you're talking about fully clinically diagnosed, you're talking about working with clinicians that have actually assessed you, gone through the process of assessment. Typically, it's a product of a referral from a primary care physician that goes to a specialist. The common kind of anecdotal discussion around what subclinical would be something that is kind of meets certain criteria. Now, when you get into the DSM, which is the diagnostic, I'm blanking right now. When you get into the DSM, ultimately that threshold has a definition. But when we talk about it socially, what is actually the approach to it? Subclinical is essentially kind of the version of it that a primary care doctor is ultimately not referring you on to a clinician, or is not choosing to prescribe pharmaceuticals because they don't see you meeting certain thresholds for prescription. That said, many people self-medicate for anxiety, depression, or otherwise with many substances and many behaviors.
Right.
It's not just, it's very easy. Oftentimes the example that's used is, oh, well, you're dealing with your subclinical anxiety by having a drink and a half, in the evening at the end of the day. Or you're managing it by going out and doing an hour run in the evening, right? There's different ways that these things can be managed. And as far as the actual reported population use of specifically psilocybin, the most common use by people is in the form of microdose. And so we're talking about meeting the market where the market's at, and then finding ways to get access for those patients. Because ultimately the conversation about psychedelics, as much as we want it to be about a really strong emerging industry, we want it to be about a revolutionary type of therapeutic for physicians and clinicians to prescribe, who need to come along with us, right? We need to make sure that doctors are supported. This is not about destroying psychiatry. This is about providing a new tool for psychiatrists to introduce to their patients. And they're going to be skeptical, and that's absolutely appropriate. They need to start by doing no harm, and understanding these things before they prescribe them is hugely important. All of this is a continuum to support patients downstream, regardless.
Well,
the outcome is the person, right?
One thing I learned this week, and I thought this was brilliantly said by someone I was speaking to, that big pharma, and when they came onto the scene, obviously with whatever prescription drugs that you want to allude to back in the early 80s, it's not necessarily bad. It served its purpose for that time. We're 40 years later, though. Times have changed. And there obviously needs to be more, solutions for people. Last thing I wanted to speak to you guys about, and I actually asked this to last week with Dr. Turnalaws, your company, yet to go public, but it will eventually. Rumor has it, in Q3. But don't want to speculate, though. But amongst the investment community and people that are interested within this space, there is a lot of interest garnered around this company specifically. Why do you think that is?
So I think the nature of the fact that we've remained public, or private rather, right? I think that in and of itself is creating a lot of interest, because the kind of the on-ramp has been very quick for most companies to kind of get engaged, go to the market, raise capital, and then kind of start to introduce what their business plans are. From our perspective, we want to be going to market having achieved milestones, and then signaling the next milestone that we're going to achieve, and show the market the velocity with which we can achieve that, right? We set out to import the product and establish a supply chain. We set out to get our studies approved, and we've done those things during the process of raising right now. As we go into what will ultimately be, a go public exercise, probably have some kind of brokered round attached to it. As we go into that process, we don't want to be saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
We're going to say we've done this, and these things are taking us on the road to this,
which is important. As this,
we need to be able to show the work, right? It's great to talk about it, but we want to be able to show the work. And by remaining private, it's allowed us to do that without needing to speak to too much of the market until we have things to actually show. And I think that that's really important for our business.
Well said, Chris. I appreciate your time connecting with us today. Let's keep in touch.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Chris.